Disclaimer: the information provided in this video is for educational and informational purposes only and should not be considered medical advice or a substitute for professional training. The content is based on general first aid principles and may not account for all individual circumstances or specific medical situations. By watching and applying the techniques demonstrated in this video, you acknowledge and agree that 1. You're responsible for how you use this information. 2. You understand that improper application of first aid techniques may result in harm or injury. 3. You will not hold the creators of this video, their affiliates, or distributors liable for any injuries, damages, or losses that may arise from your use or misuse of the information provided. For any medical emergency, always seek professional medical assistance immediately by contacting emergency services in your area. This video is not a substitute for certified first aid training, and we strongly recommend completing an accredited first aid course to gain hands-on experience and expertise. By watching this video, you affirm that you have read, understood, and agreed to this disclaimer.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Alexander here at Hertz MMA. And like I said, I'm going to go over some first aid. Before we get started, do me a favor, hit that like and subscribe button. Okay, so in my last video, my last short, I talked about teaching some TCCC, some tactical combat casualty care, combat first aid, in light of or in response to some of the horrendous acts that have been happening in recent history, right? So I'm just going to go over the TCCC, the March algorithm, to give you just a few tools to maybe save somebody's life one day. So, I mean, we can't just be about, punching and kicking all the time. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so what is TCCC, right? TCCC stands for Tactical Combat Casualty Care. Okay, and I already said that. And what that means is it's somebody that's been injured in combat, right? Before TCCC, you had combat medicine or SABC, self-aid buddy care. And because we've been at war, we were at war for about 20 years, they learned a lot of lessons from that old way of doing combat medicine. So what they learned was they compiled all the information of what was actually taking people out, okay? And they came up with the March algorithm. Okay, what is the March algorithm? The March algorithm is the order of treatment from most serious to least serious, right? So MARCH stands for massive bleeding, okay? So we treat that first. A is for airway, right? We secure an airway. R is for respiration. We have to make sure they're breathing. C is for circulation. We have to make sure their heart is pumping and it remains pumping. And then H is for hypothermia. So we want to keep the body warm, and it's also head injuries. We want to make sure that the head isn't, or if the head is damaged, we can go about treating that. Now, I'm not going to get too invasive with any of the techniques. It's all surface level stuff. I suggest that you go and you get training from a certified instructor, get some sort of certification, whether that's in first aid, take a class at EMT, first responder, that sort of thing. Right now, I'm just going to discuss some of the tools and just let you know kind of what is out there. Okay, so we're just going to go and jump right into it like this is our casualty. All right, not going to do too much. I'm going to do some explaining, but I'm just going to go through the skill-based part of it. Okay, so the first step, right, we want to make sure that our scene is safe. So scene safety is the very first step, because one casualty can be two casualties. Whatever knocked them down, I don't want that knocking me down too, and then this guy has to come and try and save both of us. And whatever knocked us down knocks him down too, right? So make sure our scene is safe, okay? Once we've decided that our scene was safe, then we'll start to go into our March algorithm, okay? So if it's a gunfight, you want to make sure that the gunfight is over with. If it's an explosion, you want to make sure there aren't secondary explosion. If there's a fire, you want to get away from it before you start rendering aid. Okay, so next step is body substance isolation, your personal protection equipment, if you have it on hand, right? I'm talking gloves, I'm talking mask, I'm talking if you have to perform, rescue breaths, you have some sort of barrier between you and them so you don't have fluid transfer. Same thing with them bleeding all over the place. They're going to be exposed. You don't want to get more bacteria into the wound. Or if they have a communicable disease, you don't want to contract that yourself, right? So we have to protect ourselves first. That goes into scene safety as well. So I've come up on the scene. I've rendered the scene safe, okay? If there are people around and you're the only one acting, you're going to have what's called a bystander effect, right? Have you ever heard somebody in a movie or something say, somebody call 911, right? It seems like it makes sense, right? But who's going to call 911? Right? I'm thinking, yes, somebody should call 911. He's also thinking, yes, somebody should call 911. Right? And everybody's thinking, somebody should call 911. Right? In a high stress situation, you need to direct. That's why I have Bob here helping me. You need to direct somebody to break them from that. Call 911. Call an ambulance. Go get help. That type of thing. Make sure you speak clearly to them so they know, okay, I just have to follow these directions. Call 911. Right? Get out your cell phone, call 911, right? Don't say somebody call 911, just direct somebody to call 911. Okay, I want to check their level of consciousness, right? So I'm just going to start talking to them, right? Hey, are you okay? Can you hear me? What's your name? If I don't get a response, then they're unconscious. I don't get a response, okay? It happens, right? I try and wake them, they don't move, you know. I don't want to start working on a dead body, but if you can recognize that they're not dead, we're going to go through that. But I try and get a response, I don't get a response. If I do get a response, okay, that gives me some information. If they're talking to me, that gives me more information. So the first thing you want to do is you want to address immediate life threats. Okay, so if they have a bleed, say, bam, right here, the femoral artery's cut, and there's blood leaking out, okay? I want to address that first before I do anything else, right? Because once I start moving down the March algorithm, if they've bled out, then I'm just working on a dead body, right? So I see bright red blood spurting out right here, pumping like it's coming from the heartbeat, because it is. Oh God. So I want to break out my tourniquet. Everybody should be carrying a tourniquet on your person if you can, right? In your car, in a backpack, some sort of thing, right? So anytime I have this red thing, I want this red thing pointed toward me, right, when I'm putting on a tourniquet. So I get my tourniquet, right, disassemble it, get it around their thigh, right, especially if it's a thigh. You may have to disassemble it if they have big legs like me. I got it backwards. Disregard, as I was. All right, so I want this pointed toward me when I'm closing it. Right? And here's why. Let me show you. So I get that in there. I cinch it up real tight. Right? Cinch it real tight. I want to take out as much slack as I can, which is why I want it toward me. I'm going to pull, cinch down as much as I can. This is Velcro. I'm going to secure that Velcro. Cool. Okay? Then it has a windlass. Right? A crank. Right? I'm going to start turning this crank. It's going to start tightening the tourniquet. Right? How many times do I turn the crank? I turn the crank and until I see the bleeding stop. I don't stop cranking until I see the bleeding stop. So I crank. I'm not gonna cinch down on this, but I crank. Boom, the bleeding stopped. I put the windlass inside the little holder. I put the rest of the strap inside the little holder. Bam, and I lock it off, right? Bleeding has stopped, okay? That's my immediate life threat. Okay? Now, when I put on a tourniquet goes high and tight. Okay? Bleeding down here, I don't care. Bleeding right here, I don't care. Bleeding right here, I don't care. I'm going to get it as high as I can to lock off that whole leg as soon as possible. I don't want to waste time trying to find secondary wounds. When I see one that's bleeding, I'm just going to shut off that whole leg. If one tourniquet doesn't work, I'm going to slap on a second tourniquet to try and get that to work and keep cranking down until my bleeding stops, okay? So once I've done immediate life threats, then I go into my March algorithm, right? Okay, so I saw that blood leaking out all over the place. I found the wound, I dressed the wound. Cool, all right? So now my massive bleeding, right? I'm gonna go and look for other bleeding spots throughout the body, right? So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna feel the back of the hand and the head. I'm gonna look at my hands, no blood. I'm gonna go down an arm, right? Every few inches, no blood, no blood, no blood. Over here, no blood, no blood, no blood, okay? Around here, nothing, nothing, nothing. I wanna check in the armpits, okay? Make sure I don't have any puncture wounds, any holes in the armpit. Check in the armpit, okay? No blood. I'm gonna check each leg individually. No blood. I know I have this here, right? So I'm not finding any new blood. No blood, right? No blood. No blood. Starting over. No blood. 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 Okay? I want to check in the groin, in this cavity. I want to look. Okay? Make sure I don't have any puncture wounds down here. At that point, I want to expose. Right? Look at the chest. Down into the abdomen. Okay? Then I'm going to roll them. When I roll somebody, I want to grab shoulder and hip. Right? Shoulder and hip. Just give them a log roll. Once I'm here, got my knee. They're right up against my knee. Right? So I can sit here, I can use my hands. Right? Nothing. I don't feel any puncture wounds. I don't see any puncture wounds. Don't see any more blood. Okay? Now, if you have the means, you remove the top, remove the shirt. You can zip through this if you have trauma shear. Okay? I don't see anything here. Roll them back. Okay? So that's me performing the blood sweep. Right? Didn't find any new blood or any new wound. After the blood sweep, say we do find something new. Say we didn't address immediate life threat. I didn't see this, so I didn't slap a tourniquet on it right away. And I did, looking for blood, and then I found that. Okay. Once you find it, go ahead and cinch that on, like we just did. Okay. I found a life threat, and I addressed that. And as you're going on, if you find life threats, you will address those as such. Right. Down the arm, no blood. Okay. So tourniquets only work on limbs, right? Don't put one around somebody's neck, right? That's actually part of the training. Rules only come when somebody makes that mistake, right? So on the legs, on the arms, high and tight, okay? If we get to a point where we have a junction bleed, and what's a junction bleed? It's where your where your leg kind of goes into your hip socket, where I can't get a tourniquet, right? So I can't get a tourniquet up here past this point, right? But say I have a puncture wound right here, right? What we're going to do is called packing a wound, right? So normally you would use a bit of combat gauze, but I'm going to use a triangle bandage to simulate combat gauze or compressed gauze or whatever, right? So for sake of argument, we're going to pretend that this is our junction bleed, right? I'm just going to put it right here in this crotch, right? For pretend, okay? So I found a hole, right? And I see bright red blood pooling right here and spurting out there, and I can't get the tourniquet up that high. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take my combat gauze and I'm going to roll a little power ball just like that. Then I'm going to feed it directly into the hole, right? And I'm going to keep feeding into the hole, right? Until I can't shove any more gauze in there. I'm just going to keep feeding it into the hole, right? Feed, 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 feed. I get to a point to where I can't feed anymore in that hole, right? Once I get to that point, I'm going to sit there and I'm going to hold pressure, right? I'm going to hold pressure for 3 minutes to try and get that bleeding to stop, okay? Just keep holding pressure for 3 minutes, okay? If you have help and there's more than one point, right, where they're bleeding out, you can have, a couple of people on here packing wounds, putting on tourniquets, all working on the same dude. Okay? So, let's say we don't have a femoral or a major artery and we're not at a junction bleed, but we have like a deep venous bleed, right? So they got a big gash right here, and it's, you know, dark red blood, and they're leaking a lot of fluid, right? It's not pumping with the heart, it's just pouring out, pouring out, pouring out, right? Initially, I want to get pressure on that wound, okay? And then I'm going to use what's called a compression bandage, right? This is one I made myself for simulation, okay? It's going to be a bandage, right? I'm going to get that bandage on there to help staunch that bleeding, okay? And then I'm going to wrap it with my compression, right? Just the ACE bandage, well, piece of elastic band, and right? I'm just going to keep wrapping that up. Man, maybe I should have done an arm. I'm going to do an arm. Right? So I got a deep venous bleed here. Boom, gash on the forearm. Right? Get that over it, apply pressure. Right? Start wrapping that wound. Wrapping that wound. Wrap, 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 wrap. It's got a bandage on it. All right, good to go. That's got compression on it. We held compression on that. Put the pressure bandage on that, wrap that up. Now that's going to hold compression there with that deep venous bleed, hopefully staunch that bleeding. With the goal of staunching that bleeding, right? Okay, so March, massive bleeding. We've dealt with massive bleeding. Right, the deep venous bleeding, we did the femoral artery, right, on a limb, or we did artery on a limb, and we did packing a wound at a junction. Okay. Now, just for the sake of argument, say we have to move our casualty from this point, right? So we pick him up and we take him over there, right? And then we sit him down, okay? Get him out of the middle of the road, get him off the sidewalk into the house, what have you, right? We move them, okay? Once you sit them down, you have to reassess all the work that you did, right? Because the last thing you want to do is, as you're moving somebody, right, somebody steps on this windlass or steps on this tourniquet, and then it gets loose because it got caught on the ground or on somebody's boot or something like that, and now they're leaking again, and you haven't checked it because you thought it was good, right? Every time you move a casualty, you always check your work, right? I'm going to check, make sure that junction bleed isn't bleeding again. I'm going to make sure that my tourniquet is still secure and still stopping that arterial bleed. I'm going to make sure that my compression bandage hasn't slid down and they're bleeding from here all over again. Also, when you put on a tourniquet, you want to note the time. Right? That's for medics come, how long has that tourniquet been on there so they don't lose that leg. Okay. All right, so for this one, I'm going to use this bob, right? Because now we're going to talk about airway. All right? For the airway, right, I have two techniques, right? The head tilt and the chin lift, okay? Head tilt, right? Airway, what we want to do is make sure his airway is clear so I don't have any obstructions while they're breathing, okay? The head tilt, I'm going to get up here. I'm going to take his head and I'm going to tilt it back in this way, and in this direction. What I'm trying to do is create a straight path from his mouth to his lungs, okay? Now, if, say he fell off something, landed on top of his head, and there's possible spinal damage. With spinal damage, I don't want to go bending and twisting on his head, right? So what I am going to do is along his jawline here, okay? I'm going to grab that, okay? And I'm going to lift, put pressure on his head, right? Not pushing down, but counter to my fingers. I'm going to lift up with my fingers to kick his jaw forward, right? To try and open up as much of that as I can. I still don't want to be pulling and twisting on his head to further damage his spine, okay? So once I have an airway secure, right, now I move on to my R part of the algorithm, which is respiration. Now I want to look, I want to listen, and I want to feel. right? So I'm gonna put my ear next to his mouth and nose, and I want to look. I want to see down his chest. I want to see good chest rise, right? He's exhaling and inhaling, exhaling, right? So I know he's breathing. If he's talking to me, then I know he's breathing, right? That's another one. That's why I say you check their level of consciousness. If they're speaking with you, then they're breathing, okay? So I'm looking. Okay, I see his chest moving. Look, listen. I hear air going in and out, right? Feel. I can feel the breath, coming out of his mouth on the side of my face. I use my hand. Okay, look, listen, and feel. Respirations, he is breathing. Okay, I want to make sure he stays breathing. Say I have an obstruction inside their mouth for some reason, right? I've done my head tilt, right? And I've looked in there, and there's an obstruction in there. I don't want to stick my fingers inside the person's mouth, right? That'd be a bad day. They start coming to and they bite my fingers off. I don't want to do that. I'm going to take a tool, right? I'm going to get down in there and I'm going to sweep. Now, I'm not going to be trying to dig that stuff out of there, but I'm going to try and sweep to clear that obstruction. Now we're going to see, right? I want to check for pulses, right? I'm going to check his carotid artery up here, right next to the trachea, right? Got a pulse, right? I'm going to check his radial pulse, right? Thumb side, right? Here, check the radial pulse. Okay, he's got a pulse, he's got a pulse, he's got a pulse, right? Pulse down at the foot, instep, right here, right where that ankle bend, right? Experiment, right? And try and feel where that is. I'm not real good at feeling your pulse in the feet. I like radial and carotid. And then we're going to treat for shock. Right? Lift the legs. Try and elevate those legs. Right? So I'm trying to keep as much blood into the organs as I can to keep them perfusing. Right? Legs don't matter. Arms don't matter. Right? Want all that blood to be flowing into his heart, into his lungs, or excuse me, gas in the lungs. Need to keep as much blood in that heart as possible. Okay? Okay, H, we want to treat them for hypothermia, right? Because the ground will start to suck all the heat out of their body, right? So I want to get them up off the ground, right? Some sort of mat, okay? I'm not going to simulate that. I'm just going to let you know, okay? I want to get them up off the deck, right? The ground is cold and sap the heat from their body, and they need to stay warm, right? Because if they start to get cold, the body will try and warm itself by pumping blood faster. And if they're bleeding out, you don't want the body pumping blood any faster, right? But to aid to that, I'm going to cover them up. So I'm going to take out my space blanket, right, or blanket of any kind, whatever you have to cover them up. Right? So I'm going to make a nice burrito. Right? Treat them for hypothermia, right? Try and wrap them up off the deck, keep them warm, keep all the heat in. Okay? The other H is examine the head, right? I'm going to put my hands on his head. Now, I don't want to go pushing and squeezing just in case his skull is cracked, right? But I want to see if I feel anything out of the ordinary, right? Just to make note of it, right? So when help comes, I can go, he's got a cracked skull, right? I'm going to open his eyes. I want to look in his eyes, and I want to look at both pupils, right? Look in his pupils. Are they fixed and staring in one direction? Are they lazy and going in opposite directions or weird directions? Is one pupil big and one pupil constricted? And all that information I need to know so when help comes, because he called the ambulance, when they come, I can go, hey, this is what's going on. He's got one pupil bigger than the other. Hey, his eyes are going in different directions. Hey, his eyes have rolled into the back of his head. You know what I'm saying? There's a big dent in his forehead, right? I want to make notes of that. Also, head wounds bleed like an SOB, right? So if the skull is not if the skull is not damaged, but they have a stripe, they're opened up somewhere on the face, you can also use your compression bandage with that, soak up that blood, wrap around their head a couple of times, not really, really tight, but just wrapped around the head a couple of times to keep that, to try and staunch that bleeding, excuse me. Right? After that, help should be on the way. Okay, all this in real time should take just a few minutes, 5 minutes, if that. Right? Your tourniquet you want to get on the first 60 seconds. Right? When you find that bleed, you have to get it on within a minute. Your junction bleeds, or you have to hold that for 3 minutes. This is going fast, right? They can bleed out in a matter of minutes, and I don't want them to bleed out, right? So when you actually work, you'll be working fast, right? All right, and that's it for the March algorithm, all right? M, massive bleeding. You deal with massive bleeding first. A, you make sure that you secure an airway. R, you make sure they're breathing with their respirations. C, you make sure you find pulses that their heart is still beating, circulation. H, you treat them for hypothermia. You want to keep the body warm. Head wounds, you want to make sure that their skull's not all jacked up, right? Ultimately, you're just trying to stave off death. Put a pause button on that until, other resources come, till help arrives, right? And then they'll get them back to bright lights and cold steel, and the people will put them back together, right? So that's all I have for you today. I know this is a break from normal karate and Aiki stuff, but I thought this subject was very important. So I hope you got something out of it. Please, please, please go get some training. Be a first responder. Go get EMT. Go get your first aid card. Go get your CPR card. Go learn CPR. All that is very, very important. Be an asset, please. So I hope you got something out of it today. And next time I will talk to you about JFACs or IFACs, individual first aid kits, and what I keep in mind, just so you see what tools are out there aside from space blanket and tourniquets. I mean, those are probably the most important things that you're going to need. But like I said, by trade I'm an EMT, so my scope of practice is a little bit beyond what they would teach in your basic TCCC. So that's all I have for you today. Thank you for watching. Go ahead and hit that like and subscribe. Please share this with other people and encourage them to get training too. I will see you in my next video. Peace.